So why did you decide that you wanted to make this video?
Because I want to make sure that he doesn't try to choose any more victims after me, and I don't want him to ever succeed with grooming someone. So I want everyone in the communities watching this video to know who he is, know why he's dangerous, and stay away from him.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sticks and Stonehenge. I know that we've been on hiatus for a while, and this is not exactly the most fun way to come off of hiatus, but due to recent sexual assault allegations involving a co-host that was ejected back in August, including those of grooming a minor, our very own Via, given that he's been using our channel and his ousting to blackmail and guilt other people into not telling on him for the things that he's been doing, I figured that it was probably a good idea for us to do a video on it, and the group agreed. So welcome everybody, Wolf and Calon especially. This is more your story than it is mine. I was still very new on the channel, and Wolf actually came on as a result of this particular series of events. How exactly did all of this get started? Like, where did this get started in terms of Thomas's ousting from the channel? We'll talk about allegations in a bit. Via wanted that to come after we talked about why he left.
So the initial conversations about Thomas being kicked from the channel, it started after a little bit after we had to unfortunately part ways with another host.
That would be Ruah, correct?
That is correct, yes. Thomas begins to tweet various NSFW accounts and associating that with Sticks and Stonehenge. Now, at the time, the initial judgment was not to kick Thomas off because we had signed an oath, which is basically an oath. The thing is, though, as time progressed, and this is where you start coming into the picture a little bit, Ali, his behavior, should I say deteriorated?
The creepy stuff he was doing became a lot more obvious. When I first came on, he gave me kind of creepy vibes because he would frequently make sexual jokes in my direction that were very clearly not reciprocated, but despite being told many times that he had crossed the line with me, he didn't exactly stop.
Right. Around that time, we started looking into more focused organizations to produce various content on, and during the course of that investigation, we happened to come across the YSEE. Now, for those who don't know, the YSEE, they are basically an ethno-nationalist organization that spouts Greek polytheism, even though it's a very Christianized form of it.
They're basically like our version of the AFA. They're one of the largest Hellenist organizations. There's only technically 2 or 3 of them if you count the Orphics as their own organization. There's basically Hellenian, which has its own problems. That's the organization that I'm a part of. The YSEE and the Orphics, which themselves are not really their own organization so much as they're kind of an online community that mimics the structure of an organization and will train people in their version of Hellenic polytheism. But the YSEE, we're going to be doing a collaboration with Hammered Out fairly soon, where I'm going to come on to talk about all of the problems with the YSEE. They're quite anti-Semitic, and they refuse to marry LGBTQ folks on the grounds that they claim that their ritual represents the divine union of Zeus and Hera, and therefore has too much to do with reproduction. They also won't answer questions about whether or not infertile men and women can be married in heterosexual couples.
Around this time, it came to light that Thomas was also a member of the YSEE, and in particular, he had an affiliation with one of their leaders. This individual is, shall we say, infamous for posting very anti-Turkish, very racist material. And when I say racist, I mean not like, oh, I wish Turkey had never took Constantinople or something of that nature. I mean actual attacks about the genetics of the Turks or the genetics of the Greeks. And so this came up. And on top of that, I had a lot of online interaction with a YSE member who kept on trying to defend that marriage was something that should be held to reproductive roles because, fuck minorities. Because of this, we then started behind the scenes talking to Thomas to try to get him out of the YSE. This is in part why also it has taken us a decent amount of time before we have gone after the YSE, because we are trying to persuade him to go out and see reason. Unfortunately, he decided that, of his own free will, I might add, that he was going to remain there. So he wouldn't budge, even though I talked about, well, hey, look, you're on a channel, 2 of your co-hosts are trans.
Do you want to talk about his reason for staying? Because given that this is a polytheist channel, a lot of his reasons were pretty dubious to all of us.
On this channel, we maintain sort of a standard of praxis. That is, if I accept someone as a co-host onto this channel, I expect them to be a practicing polytheist. I do rituals pretty much whenever I can. Allie does rituals as she can, and Ulfer here, well, Ulfer, how many statues around your House of the Gods do you have?
Probably like 20 or 30.
So yes, we expect the utmost.
I have 15. I have 12 on my main altar and 3 on various shrines.
Yeah, I need to get more. I have like, what is it, 10 myself? And that's still not enough. Regardless. So I don't expect the co-host to come in and have like $1,000 statues or 50 statues or whatever. I expect the co-host to come in and have an amount of practice.
You could have no statues and still pray and give offerings to the gods. The statues are helpful and they help you dedicate a sacred space, but the whole point is that at the very least, you should be doing some form of praxis, whether that's daily prayer or, in the case of Hellenism, things like making offerings regularly through some kind of calendar, etc.
Thomas, as it would turn out, was not doing any of that and has not been doing any of that for pretty much the time since we knew him. He was using the YSEE as sort of a Christian church. That is, he would go there, he would sing some hymns to Aphrodite, then he would go back home and that would be it. That does not a pagan really make.
So this is where, after the 2 of us and Via tried to convince him for quite some time, and again, we'll get to Via in a few minutes, for quite some time that him continuing to remain a part of that organization when we were gearing up to do a takedown was a problem. This is where we pulled Wolf in. Partially because he wouldn't listen to reason, and partially because Wolf is very, very good at talking to people who won't listen to reason. He's a bit less threatening in some ways than Ocean is, and a bit more patient than the rest of us. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I have a long history of being able to talk people through really difficult situations and topics. So when I was brought on, I was made aware of all of Thomas's history basically, and I agreed that he was too problematic to maintain on the channel. I had been asked if I wanted to come on to Sticks and Stonehenge, and I agreed, but then in the time of me accepting, we realized that Thomas actually was extremely problematic in that he had these inappropriate incidences that kept popping up, and then also his association with an ethno-nationalist group, which is something that I don't tolerate whatsoever. I spend a lot of my free time fighting racists. I'm not going to help host a polytheist pro channel and one of my co-hosts being an ethno-nationalist or supporting ethno-nationalists, even by association. Thomas was friends with one of the leaders of his local group, and his main excuse for staying in the group was that it was the only group that he knew that was practicing his flavor of polytheism. And so we asked him multiple times, like, yo, you got to cut this out. You got to stop. And he's like, oh, no, I might. I'm working on it. I'm trying to get out. I'm not going to go back. But then we found out that he had went back super recently, like within the last few days. And he said, all right, that's it. You're out. And I just kind of like laid it all on a table. Basically like I am right now. And eventually he agreed, and I told him, like, look, if you can straighten up and prove that you're not supporting ethno-nationalists anymore, then maybe we can revisit you coming back onto the channel. But until then, that's it. Like, I'm cutting contact with, you having anything to do with Sticks and Stonehenge. Like, you just won't be part of the channel anymore.
To make it clear, though, we did give him quite a bit of time at the beginning of this particular meeting.
It was about a month, at least a month of multiple conversations saying, you got to stop, you got to stop, you got to stop. And he kept saying, I will. And in that time, he went to multiple meetings over and over again while promising that he was going to stop.
Ulfer is like the only one here who had any sort of form of group. The rest of us don't have a group.
Yeah, and that's very much the case. Like, I have an online community that I'm pseudo a part of, but that basically consists of me writing essays on Stoicism and submitting them to try to become an exegete and like a forum. There's also a monthly libation that is done on camera that we can all do together, but there's no demoi anywhere near me. The closest one is in Portland. Okay, so at the beginning of the meeting where we first brought him in to have the conversation that he was going to be kicked, we did give him a percentage of time. I think it was about a half an hour to talk about his side of the story, quote unquote. He claimed that he had talked to folks in the YSCE about our allegations, that he'd gotten answers. Did we not give him a chance to speak?
It was almost an hour.
And then we very thoroughly explained to him exactly why he was being kicked, how long he would have to stay out of the organization, and what he would need to do in order to get back in good graces, correct?
Correct. He was given a reason, he was given punishment, and then he was given chance at redemption so that he could come back. Like, it wasn't a, we hate you and we're kicking you out of all of our lives. I don't even think any of us blocked him.
A couple of us did. I was not one of them. Calon didn't.
I wasn't either. I maintained constant communication with him, had multiple friendly conversations with him on Twitter, and, we would exchange back and forth every now and then with discussing things. We would retweet each other. I mean, it was like there was no issue whatsoever. And it's actually really funny because in some of the rhetoric that was being displayed recently, Thomas was making points saying he feels uncomfortable being around Wolf and Ocean and those types because of how he was treated, despite us treating him extremely fairly and maintaining friendship throughout this whole time.
And here I'd like to add a religious point. So I had brought up the oath earlier. Thomas, by maintaining his ties with the nationalist organization, he technically broke the oath, which in Ulfer and I's religion is one of the greatest errors you can make.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, he broke Xenia for the same reason. Like, even within his and my faith, and I hate, I want to wash my mouth out saying that because I don't think he's actually a Hellenist. But, even within my faith, that's effectively the same as swearing on the river Styx. And, you're inviting oath and retribution, the spirits of oath of retribution on you if you break an oath like that.
Right, well, for us, it's a trip to Nidhogger. But the thing is, though, at the time, we thought that he was redeemable to the point to where we didn't spread that around our general polytheistic community, whereas if we had spread around that he's an oath breaker, that would have been a major issue.
Well, and that's the next step was we did not publicize the reason for him leaving. We gave sort of a generic, Wolf is going to be stepping in for him for some time because he needed some time to deal with his mental health, which I would like to sort of expand into a little bit. Wolf, Calon, both of you guys have dealt with him much more extensively than me. He kind of cut off contact with me. He didn't block me until later when I told him that what he had done with Via was unacceptable, and I have a screen cap of this and the excuses that he made. I know that he did talk to both of you. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about how he used his mental health sort of as a weapon? Because when things came out later about some of the victims of his harassment, it became clear that there was a pattern with friends and victims alike.
With me, Thomas would oftentimes, for his mistakes, he would cite depression as well as his autism, the fact that he lacks social awareness. And for me, that is something I can understand and relate with because I myself am autistic and I do suffer depression. I mean, what trans person really doesn't in this day and age? Anyhow, because of this, I gave him a lot of leeway in terms of his comments and whatnot. And he would basically take advantage of this to go ahead and continue various forms of inappropriate behavior, even though they had been pointed out as inappropriate.
Thomas entered into the Discord communities recently, within the last month or so, I want to say it is.
Well, he came back after his hiatus after we kicked him.
I noticed increased activity within the last 6 weeks. I get notifications to Discord sent to my phone, and I kept seeing his name pop up more often, more recently. I noticed he started getting a little bit more aggressive with his inappropriate comments. They started happening more and more often. I, being a white male who is also extremely busy working 90 hours a week, didn't put a lot of thought into it. I just kind of shrugged it off. I was aware of it, but it didn't raise a red flag for me at the time. But it did many of the women on Discord in those servers. I started noticing chatter in the background, and me, like I said, being as busy as I am, for it to catch my attention, it then raised a red flag for me, man, if this is so bad that I'm seeing this many people talk about it, I need to kind of refocus and see what's going on here. And so I started having a few conversations with a handful of people, and I realized, okay, Thomas is really making all of these people feel really uncomfortable. So I reached out to Thomas because at the time I had it in my head that Thomas was an honest actor who has some social interaction problems. I was under the impression that he was autistic, and so maybe he just wasn't picking up on these cues, because I've got some autistic friends that just don't pick up on social cues that I myself would be aware of. I wouldn't be making some of the decisions that Thomas was making, but maybe he was making them because of this. I usually try to give people the benefit of the doubt. So I had a genuine conversation with him, and I've got some screenshots that are probably going to be on screen here, where I was like, yo, you need to calm down, because I heard that he was reaching out to people when people were telling Thomas, like, dude, you're messing up, we're about to kick you out of the server. It's at least going to be, a temporary ban where you're not allowed in because this is how uncomfortable you're making people. And so he started DMing people, trying to guilt trip them about his situation, saying that, oh, I do this every time I get a new group, I overstep boundaries and I don't realize it and I mess everything up. And so I was just reaching out to him kind of like as a bro and trying to be really chill with him and saying, like, yo, you need to calm down, you need to take a step back, and you need to chill out, because I'm super busy and I really don't spend nearly as much time online as other people do, just because I don't have the time, especially Discord. Twitter's a little bit easier for me. But if I'm seeing this take place, that means it must be pretty bad. And so I need you to get right, and the best way for you to do that is take a step back, blow off some steam somehow in real life, and chill out, because you're making people uncomfortable with you reacting the way that you are. He basically thanked me and said, I'm going to therapy, and this happens all the time, but thank you for the advice, I really appreciate it, blah blah blah. I thought that was going to be the end of it, and we really didn't communicate much after that. It was literally the next day after I had that conversation with him, stuff started coming out that just makes me want to vomit.
I was actually the server meister of a private D&D server. It was actually the server that he was on, so I got to actually get a rather unique perspective here. Whereas Ulfra was dealing with Thomas on one side, I was dealing with the Thomas on the other side. Basically what ended up happening is that we noticed that, first of all, he wouldn't stop posting NSFW stuff in the general chat. So for those who don't know Discord, when you go on there, there's sometimes a general chat, and then there's an 18 and up chat for topics that aren't necessarily safe for work. Now, we had designated that chat in order for people to be able to go on there for various education of an adult nature. What we did not make was for adults to go and be, quote, horny, end quote, which is exactly what he typed into that general chat. He said, I'm horny. Obviously, that being in a general part of the server where minors had access to, that created a problem. So we go ahead and we make the collective decision to delete that comment, obviously.
Typically, 18 plus chats in most of the Discords in our communities, be it atheist Discords, polytheist Discords, those channels are for adult conversations that we wouldn't want minors to participate in. It's not a channel for you to go in and say, I'm fucking horny, I want to look at this. Normally, we usually avoid posting things like nudity and porn and stuff like that. It's where you can talk about more graphic things, but not in such a way that is explicitly hypersexual, like Thomas's comments were. Specifically in the Ocean Soul Discord server, we don't allow porn in our 18 plus chat. It's one of the rules that I laid down early on. I didn't want it to be a chat where you just go to get horny. It's so that you can have constructive conversations that are more adult, that children shouldn't be aware of.
So this brings us back to this part of the story. Basically, Thomas up to this point had not verified his age. So for those who also don't know, there's a simple age verification mechanism whereby you go, you state your birthday. If it's above 18, we let you in. If it's not, well, we don't. He posted his birthday, and his age seemed to be above 18. Or I should say seems. As soon as he posted that and we let him in, he said, finally, now I can be horny, quote unquote. Now, at the time, of course, we sort of just laughed it off because, well, maybe he was just kidding. Little did we know, he wasn't. He proceeded to go in and describe how he wanted Ritze, who is a character from Tokyo Ghoul, which has a lot to deal with cycle of violence and whatnot. Ritze is a character in Tokyo Ghoul where she is the one who infects another character named Kaneki Kin with Ghoul Doom, basically. She inadvertently turns him into a ghoul trying to eat him. And so he then goes and describes how Rise should have made Kaneki her slave. And then on top of that, afterwards, he then proceeded to go through in a very graphic fashion, talk about how he wanted Rise to slowly consume him, drain him of blood, and ultimately eat him. This obviously was not appropriate for the NSFW section because, well, graphic fantasy, not exactly something any of us wanted to read, and the kind of stuff that you should kind of get consent to before posting that. So yes, he posted that, and then he also posted his philosophy of femdom, which is kind of infamous, in which I'm sure Ali has a word or two to say about.
Yeah, so y'all should be able to see that on the screen right now. There is a heck of a lot wrong with it. First off, the dynamic between dominant and submissive is not one respects the other and the other treats the other one like dirt. That may be fun for a scene or two, but in a long-term relationship of any kind, there's a different form of respect that is given between dom and sub, and at any time, the sub can end whatever it is the dom is doing with a single word. That might even be something you like to tell yourself while you're in that scene. It is not at all the case for the relationship overall, and if there's not some form of aftercare or something else, then what you're in is an abusive relationship, boyo.
This obviously raised another red flag. So then we come around to D&D.
Calon was DMing a D&D group on this private server, of which I was a participant, so was Via, and there are a couple of people that were also participating that wish to remain anonymous. Thomas was in a part of this group. Thomas's character, for lack of a better term, was creepy. Nobody really liked his character. Nobody liked the way he played his character. His character, which he claimed he really associated with, would often break the physical boundaries of other characters. Things like, weaving in between people's legs or touching them inappropriately. When my character met his for the first time, she ended up drawing a weapon on his character because of just how aggressively his character violated personal boundaries.
His character was also a tabaxi.
So basically, he tried to play a tabaxi like a cat, and it was really obnoxious. Well, he requested that Calon kill his character off, and because we were in the process of taking down a cult, a rather ruthless and violent cult, and two of our members had them convinced that we were fine. Basically, my character was a local who was willing to do all kinds of favors, and if this cult was sacrificing people, well, my character hates demon worshippers and sees them as not human, and his character was a demon worshipper. Calon devised a very graphic way to kill his character off.
I did. This cult worshipped the murder god Baal. So I figured what better way than to take what the book said and actually have that happen. So in the actual book, this is of course a pre-written campaign. I don't have anywhere near the time to homebrew an entire campaign setting. The specific area has a shrine to Baal, the murder lord, and on that are the various entrails and hearts of various NPCs that had been sacrificed by the cult. So I figured that a fun way to do it would be to have the player characters go ahead and sacrifice Thomas's character.
Was informed of this ahead of time and seemed almost ridiculously eager to do it, but we'll get there.
The way I ended up playing it is that I had his character crucified and then slowly disemboweled. I will let Ali go through the rest because I still feel really dirty.
Yeah, so do I. So what ended up happening was in-game, the cultists asked us to provide a sacrifice. One of our characters, again, was a part of an allied cult. The other one was my character, and my character, I'm a warlock with a very high charisma stat. So I was able to convince both our party member and the cult that I was a previous, not member of the cult, but an associate of theirs. So they're like, okay, well, prove it to us, give us a sacrifice. I grabbed Thomas by the hair and basically drag him over and chain him up, which again, we all agreed on this scene beforehand without Thomas disclosing his particular predilections toward this specific scene. These things only came out a week later. So that whole him getting devoured and blood drained and all that stuff came a few days after this scene. So he gets murdered in an extremely graphic way. Like, we're talking disemboweling, all kinds of things. I'm gonna, spare for anybody with a weak stomach. But here's the thing. He made these sort of mewling noises and was breathing very heavily into his mic. Like, he sounded like a little kid. Like, oh no. But he was breathing so heavily that we didn't know if he was just bad at roleplay. However, a couple of the other women that were role-playing, and keep in mind, every single other person in that room, except for him, I believe, was a woman, noticed that if you look down at his picture, because he was on camera on Roll20, he was a bit too into it. And by that I mean he was kind of shaking a little bit, and he had this look of ecstasy on his face, in addition to those mewling and heavy breathing noises. Now, I'm pretty sure that anybody who's listening can kind of get where I'm going with this.
He was masturbating.
We have no proof that that's what's happening, but I don't see another explanation for what we saw and heard. It's not like he whipped his dick out on camera. It was just very creepy how he spoke and breathed, and during the time that he was trying to gaslight several of the people that he had been harassing in DMs and over voice chats out of coming forward about their stories. It was the fact that this thing happened on the 18+ chat that actually led us to create a special channel to talk about whether or not to kick him, because he had convinced a number of people in the Discord server that, number one, Sticks and Stonehenge had done him dirty. In fact, he was trying to convince the actual owner of the server to kick Wolf and Calon and Ocean and I, because he claimed that we had done him dirty in the past. So this is, again, part of the reason why we're making this video, is because he had been using our silence about the circumstances and the methodology of kicking him from this channel to groom other people. And this is where the rather graphic stories of continuous, consistent sexual harassment, both in public and in private, because at least one of our friends, Shay, who said that she was comfortable with her name being mentioned, provided screenshots of him basically horny posting and creep posting on her in public and Twitter. He also did something very similar to another friend of ours who wanted to remain anonymous about how attractive her tits looked when she was asking for a compliment. And then more stories started coming out.
We weren't sure if it's merited a kick or a ban, so we did the anarcho-communist thing and put it out there. And that is when we started seeing all these allegations come out. We found out that he had been, in VC particularly, fetishizing various trans women in the server. And by fetishizing, I mean having various graphic sexual fantasies about the various women in the server.
Quite often, he would tell these stories when they were AFK to other people without their knowledge, and other people would come to them and be like, "Hey, are you actually cool with this?" This is how at least two of the people who came forward described it.
And this even led to the fetishization of a married individual and their spouse. At that point, we're like, no, he's out, because sexual harassment. And that's when Via decided to come forward.
And we will let Via herself tell her story, because that is the ultimate reason why we decided to create this video. I asked Via directly what she wanted to do, and she said that she wanted to put him on blast as hard as she possibly could across the entire internet so he could never hurt somebody again.
And I support that sentiment 100%.
It had been a couple of months since many people had talked to him in the community, though apparently he still did have at least a couple of friends from places like the Hellenist community and from the philosophy community, but apparently he was still talking to you Via through that whole time, is that correct?
Yeah, we had lots of conversations throughout that time.
Okay, so do you want to talk a little bit about what brought you to coming to us and letting us know that this stuff had been going on? Like, what made you realize that something wasn't quite right here?
Well, it actually took me a while to realize that something wasn't right. It took other people coming forward about how he had harassed them for me to realize how screwed up some of the things that he's said to me have been.
That's kind of how grooming is, right? Like, you're not supposed to know what's happening to you.
Yep.
So do you want to kind of start from the beginning? You guys have known each other a lot longer than I've even known any of you, so it's kind of strange to be the one doing the interview.
Yeah, I met him in the Oceans Raiders group chat, and from then on, we started the channel. And after that, Thomas and I were in connection much more.
So you met him before you even became a co-host here.
Yeah.
Was he creeping on you then, or it wasn't until later when he actually became closer friends with you through the channel?
Yeah, it was later after we got closer through the channel.
So about when would you say that the sexual conversation started? Because when he was confronted, he claimed that, quote, you talked to him about sex first, which I'm going to heavily emphasize is not an excuse to talk to a minor about sex.
It definitely isn't. I honestly can't remember for sure if he was the one who started talking first or if I was, but I'm pretty sure it was him because he's always been like super open about his kinks and like not really too conscious about like how talking like that can affect other people.
Would you say that at any time you felt like when he was sharing his kinks and things with you, did you feel like any of it was directed towards you?
I didn't like directly feel like that, but like looking back now with like the knowledge that I have and what he's said to me since I've turned 18, that's when I started looking back on it and realizing that like possibly he was like trying to like involve me in it.
In your testimony in our Discord server when we were trying to figure out what to do with him after the D&D situation, there were some screenshots posted. You talked about him nagging you about your relationship status. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, he has on multiple occasions asked me like how my relationship life is going and like asked lots of details like who I'm with and like how it's going.
Didn't he also try to probe you about whether or not you would date cis white guys?
Yeah, he did. Like I mentioned how like I'm a bit tentative about being into cis white guys, and he started like asking questions and like wondering why, and like looking back it was definitely like him trying to probe me out.
Do you want to try to talk about your feelings about the night that he drunk texted you?
Which night that he drunk texted me?
The night that he drunk texted you begging for dick pics.
That night, I brought up that like I had been smoking, like always, and he started asking me, no, you're not legal yet. How are you smoking? And I was like, I turned 18 like 4 days ago, and then he started like talking about how he wants to see pictures of me and wants me to give him my OnlyFans when I make it, and lots of pestering me for explicit pictures.
There was a particularly noxious statement made there at the end also.
Yeah, it was something about how he wanted to suck my cock and how trans cock has been one of his dreams and shit like that.
Has he ever drunk texted you explicit content before that? I mean, you mentioned that he'd never asked you for nudes before that when we talked before, but...
He never explicitly asked me for explicit content, but like he was never reserved about talking about like sexuality and shit with me.
Did it ever make you feel uncomfortable? Like, clearly you felt uncomfortable about the night he begged you for nudes.
I don't think it did make me uncomfortable, like, in the moment, because I didn't realize what was going on.
He had good reason to pick you as a target.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those things? I know that you've been a little bit open about your mental health in the past.
I have a very long history of mental health problems, and I've also had a history of sexual abuse. I was sexually assaulted when I was 15, and I'm still struggling with PTSD from that.
Would you say that in terms of, the clinical term would be hypersexuality, that your openness to talking about these things might have been part of the reason he targeted you?
Yeah, probably.
Was it only when you started hearing about the stories from other women in the server, was that the only point that you realized it was off, or did it feel odd at any other point, the way that he would talk to you?
It felt very odd when he was drunk texting me, begging me for nudes and shit, but I mean, I kind of blocked it out of my mind and didn't think too much about it.
Yeah, sometimes when things make people uncomfortable, that's one of the things that we do, especially if it reminded you of what happened before.
Mhm.
Before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about some of the excuses that he made. One of the first ones that he made was that he didn't know that it was wrong to talk to you about sexual things.
Yeah.
Do you believe that? Is there evidence to the contrary anywhere in your DMs?
Oh, there's definitely evidence to the contrary. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept it so mild in DMs and, like, only really talked much in voice calls with me.
Did that happen often?
Not particularly often, but whenever I was in a voice chat with him, it often got to a point where he was talking about sexual topics.
So what about the excuse regarding his autism? Because that's the one that he seems to most frequently make is, oh, because I'm autistic, I somehow don't understand what's right and wrong properly and make people uncomfortable because of it.
Yeah, that's a super fucked excuse. Coming from an autistic person myself, obviously I have a hard time understanding some social cues and social boundaries, but that doesn't give you an excuse to specifically target a person who is very vulnerable to these types of situations already. Every single bit of what he said makes it seem like he was trying to sexualize me.
So in terms of age difference, I know that he's claimed to be 21 and 23 on separate occasions.
Yeah.
Does either of those age gaps make a difference for you in terms of how you feel about it?
I mean, both make me heavily uncomfortable considering, like, I was a minor when he started talking to me. I was like 15 or 16 years old.
Yeah, so I've been putting 15/16 in all of my posts regarding it because you weren't sure which age you guys met. And in terms of the claims regarding things like the YSEE, because you were present during the meeting, correct?
Yes, I was.
Do you believe that in any way we made it unclear why he was being ousted from Sticks and Stonehenge?
No, it was completely 100% clear. It was very obvious that, like, what he was doing was detrimental to the channel and that, like, something needed to be done about it.
Do you want to give a comment on why we decided not to publicly out him for membership with an anti-Semitic hate group?
Yeah, lots of it was because he was a friend of ours at the time, and lots of it was because he had expressed that he wanted to, like, fix it and make it better, even though he hadn't by the time we had to kick him off the channel. I think that we all still wanted him to have that chance to, like, find better groups to be around.
So, in conclusion, effectively, the claims that he's been making about both his ousting for Sticks and Stonehenge and the excuses that he's been making, that he was drunk and that's what makes it okay, that he's autistic and that's what makes it okay, that you were open to talking about it, that that's what makes it okay, none of those excuses hold up in your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, again, thank you to everybody who has watched this. I hope to the bottom of my heart that he can't make it into another community, that he won't be able to keep spreading lies, that he won't be able to keep making excuses. It's clear that he has a long pattern of this sort of abuse. I mean, again, Calon and I were technically victimized by him in the D&D situation, which we talked about earlier. He tried to smear the name of the entire Sticks and Stonehenge crew, who he shared a long tenure with. He was a part of the group for longer than I've been so far, and he targeted somebody who trusted him, somebody who was extremely vulnerable, and tried to blame his mental illness, and multiple times attempted to stop people from talking about their problems with him by threatening suicide and by using his mental health as a weapon. person.
Yeah.
So this person, even though he comes off as somebody who is just clueless or silly or, somebody who's got some mental health problems, he might have those problems. He's also a predator, and he can't hide behind those problems to have an excuse for his predatory behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope that your testimony here will serve as a warning for anybody who he might try to lie to in the future. I hope that if people look him up, they find us first.
So do I.
Thank you so much for your idea to do this. Thank you so much for stepping forward and having the courage to share your story. I know it was really, really hard because he stepped very carefully to make sure that it was legal, and he stepped very carefully to make you feel responsible.
Yeah.
But thank you again for coming forward to us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to help make a video about this person and put the word out there that he's a piece of shit and shouldn't be trusted.
Well, like I said, this is about you. This is about how you felt. I want to make sure that you get whatever form of justice that you want to try to get. And if the most that we can do as a community is to blacklist him, then I hope he stays on that blacklist.
Agreed.